This is that brake valve assembly. I broke the bolts loose off camera, just loosened them up. I had put the taken it over before I broke the bolts loose and just ran it through the bead blaster. Now, what I did is I taped this top off, and the top looks like it's either maybe aluminum or pot metal or something like that. When I get it off, I'll let you know what it is. But I didn't want to bead blast that, so what I did is I just taped it off so that it didn't get it. And I just did it roughly, just so that it would get some of that caked on dirt that the power washer didn't get off. I see traces of water in there. Let me go get a wrench, take that off with, and I'll bring you back. What I did is I chucked the bottom up in the vise just so it would hold these things. Boy, there's some grungy stuff in there. What I'm going to do is tear it apart. I don't know. I'll try and separate these things somehow. So that I don't get them mixed up. Even though they should be the same, I kind of want to put the pistons back in the same bore that they came out of. Why is this one stuck and that other one was free? This thing doesn't want to come off like the other one did. Let me grab a screwdriver. Kind of having a bit of a time getting that piston off of that rod, and I don't want to bugger it up. I mean, I got the washer off of it. I don't know why it's being held on there. There is, if I can show you this. Sorry for that camera, but trying to do something with one hand. There is a little retaining ring on that rod, and I'm wondering, because of the water in there, if it didn't kind of rust onto the bottom of that piston. But what I'll do is let me keep working on it, and I'll bring you back. I just got to be careful. As you might be able to see, I nicked that the top of it a little bit. Nut still goes over it, but I just got to kind of be careful. But I'll bring it back. I'm going to start washing these parts out. I still haven't gotten that piston off of there, and I kind of still, it's got that like snap ring around the shaft. And on the bottom of the other piston, there's kind of like a little recess that the snap ring fits into. So it could be just a combination of it being compressed into that tapered opening and just jammed in there, or it's possible that it could be a little bit rusty. But I'm just going to start washing these parts out right now. I was kind of working on that solenoid valve on that. On my truck, I've got that auxiliary fuel tank, and I've got a solenoid valve on it, and for some reason that solenoid valve is leaking. It's leaking. It's kind of leaking out of the valve itself. Now I can't tell. I think it's where you connect the hose to. There's a bolt in it, and not a bolt. It's a like either a compression nut that goes onto it, or it could have an O-ring on it. I tried tightening it up, couldn't figure out what it was at first. The solenoid valve has got the main part on it, and man, I'm getting a lot of dirty junk out of that. Well, gotta tell you, the cleaning fluid's a little dirty too. I couldn't figure out where it was leaking from, so I started tightening things up, and there's some Allen screws that hold the main body of the solenoid valve together, and they were kind of loose, and I was thinking, okay, that was what the problem was. It was leaking there. And then it still continued to show signs, and when I say it's leaking, it's not leaking very much. It's just very minimal. But what I did is I tightened that up, and that didn't solve the problem. So I thought about our the first thing that I had done was did the hose connections, and then that didn't solve the problem. So why isn't that port flowing under there? Either that's restricted or it's not flowing. I gotta check into that. Sure, not flowing out of there very good. But anyways, what I was saying was the solenoid valve. First of all, I checked the hose connections that go onto the adapters, and I tightened them up more and slowly. Then I tried the Allen bolts that hold the top of the solenoid valve onto the main body, and they were kind of loose, and I tightened them up, and I thought, okay, that's it. But then it wasn't. It was still dripping. So I think it is actually dripping out of that nut that goes into the main body. But I'm not going to be able to fix it today. I think I've got to go down and get my truck inspected this afternoon, and then I think tomorrow I've got to go out to Indiana, pick up some stuff for a guy, and bring it back to Buffalo. But here are the tubes that go into the TA. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a machinist file and a rat tail file and clean them up before I put them back in. Those pliers where I pulled the first two out left some scoring on the outside of it. I just want to make sure that it's cleaned, it gets off of there, and then when I tapped into the two end tubes, I want to make sure that there's no burrs in there. The pieces are out. I'll clean them up, rinse them out in the parts washer, and get them cleaned up before I put them back in there. But I'm not going to show you that. I'll bring you back and show you putting them in there with the new O-rings. So here's the new O-rings. Again, what I'm going to have to do is slide this the tube in there and slip the O-ring on the inside in. As discussed in another video, if you were to do this before you put the transmission back together, put the TA assembly in there, what I would do is slide them tubes in there, and then slide the tubes in there and put the O-rings on when the TA and everything isn't in your way on the inside. That way they can be kind of like pre-assembled in there for you to be able to do it. And then what I've got is I've got some spray grease that I'm going to put on it. One of the viewers recommended using like dishwashing Dawn, like dishwashing liquid on it. Another viewer recommended putting Vaseline on it. Neither one of them do I have at the shop, so I'm just going to use this grease, and hopefully with the correct O-rings they should slide in there pretty good. According to the manual, they're supposed to come out and go in easy, so it hasn't happened yet. Hopefully it'll start happening. But I'll bring you back when I have them all in. I'll show you putting them, all the O-rings installed on the tubes, and I'll show you pushing them in. Okay, so what I've done is I've got the O-rings on the inside installed. I sprayed this grease both on the tubes, and I put it kind of in the port of the TA. Now I'm going to spray some on the inside of this, so it kind of lubricates that port up on the outside. And let's see how they go in. let me bring you back. I got it here. I mean, if worst case comes to worst, I can always get more O-rings. No, they went in. No, they weren't in good. Let me reposition the camera, get some light in there, and I'll show you the inside. Make sure that the O-rings went in on the TA portion of it all right. So hopefully you should be able to see that. As you can see, the O-rings are, it's seated, the tube's seated in there fine. The O-rings, actually, the last time that I did this, when I looked in there before I pulled them back out again to replace those O-rings, you could actually see some part of the O-ring on the outside of it. So it looks like they're seated good. So what I'm going to do is spin the transmission around. I want to Loctite the bolts that hold the cross member for the shift linkage in, but I'll show you that when I get the transmission spun around. And these are the screws that I want to Loctite. And now again, as I mentioned in a previous video, I don't think these screws could ever come out. They're long enough that I don't think that they could unloosen without hitting the cover plate that goes over the top of this. But if they do unloosen, and again, they're only Phillips screws, so if they do unloosen, you could get play in that thing. So I'm just going to put a little Loctite on it. I'm not going to put a lot of Loctite on it because I don't want anybody that has to remove these Phillips screws in the future to have issues with getting the things out again. Again, if from a previous video, if you remember, I had kind of a little bit of an issue getting those things out of there. But I'm going to do this for all 4 screws, and then I'm going to be ready to hook the chain up to it and get it on the engine hoist, and we can start reinstalling it in the tractor. So I've got the other 2 with the Loctite put on them. Just going to torque them down a little bit by hand, all 4 of them, and again, we'll be ready to get this thing in the tractor. So I'm going to be hooking the chain up to it, and moving it over to get in the tractor, but that probably will be the next episode. So I'll bring you back for that. Okay, so I brought you back a lot sooner than I expected. There's one other thing that I've got to do before I can hook the chain up to it, and that is get this nut back on there. So let me do that now. One of the things that I did receive in that new gasket kit is a new retaining ring for that. So I'm going to be using that. Let me see if I can find the old one. This is the old one, and you can see that they actually peened it over to hold that nut in place. I think that nut is 300 foot-pounds of pressure that I have to torque that to. But let me double check that. I'm going to be putting the nut on, and I'll bring you back for that. So I've got the nut on, and I'm just taking the slack out with a 1-inch ratchet. I've got the transmission locked in gear so that it holds it while I do it. I'm gonna have to get a pull pipe, so let me bring you back. Okay, so I've got a pull pipe, even though you probably can't see it. I've got a pull pipe on this, so I've got about 6 foot of leverage. Now, one of the viewers kind of recommended drilling and pinning that. I just wanted to make sure it turned smoothly before I did it. What I actually think I'm going to do is take and peen that over like they did the other one. But I probably will do that off camera. I'll bring you back. So off camera, what I did was I took and peened that over so that the nut can't rotate back off of it. So okay, now we are ready to get the chain on it, get the engine hoist hooked up, and take it back to the tractor. So that'll be the next episode, and I'll bring you back for that.